In the heart of Glasgow lies a single square mile that has hosted some of Scotland's most brutal and notorious murders. Between 1857 and 1904, 4 notorious cases consumed the residents of Glasgow and beyond. Unfortunately, some of those cases have never been solved, and today we focus on one such case in particular, a case that history often tends to overlook. This is the murder of Jessie McPherson. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from Wikipedia, the Glasgow Times, a lineup article by Daniel O'Connor, Moonstone Press, CBS, and the rest I will list down below. On the evening of July 4th, 1862, Scottish police were called to investigate one of the country's most gruesome crime scenes. As investigators stepped into 17 Sandyford Place on Souchy Hall Street, where Mr. Fleming, aka Old Fleming, was living, his son actually owned the house, but he was living there, these investigators stepped into a nightmare. A young servant of the house named Jessie McPherson, or McPherson, I hope I'm saying that right. Some of these Scottish names are a bit confusing to me. She was found lying face down in a pool of her own dried and darkened blood. The killer had haphazardly tossed a carpet over her face, but lifted her gown, exposing her lower half, and it was clear that the beating had not been a quick one. Over 40 wounds were counted on Jessie's head, face, hands, and arms, and hidden in a nearby drawer, an iron meat cleaver. According to Daniel O'Connor's article, quote, "The bed appeared to have been slept in, the bedclothes were stained with blood and had been pulled down into a heap at the foot of the bed. A blood-stained sheet, which looked as though it had been taken off the bed, was rolled up under the washstand. There was blood all about the room, and close to the window wall, 3 bloody prints of a naked left foot. Also a chest that had held Jessie McPherson's clothes stood open. The few remaining contents were thrown back, all stained with blood, as though, said Dr. Fleming at the trial, some bloody hand had been at work among them. All of Jessie's clothes had disappeared, and her everyday dress was gone from its hook. In the lobby between the bedroom and the kitchen were smears of blood. There was blood on the kitchen sink and in the chest of drawers in Old Fleming's wardrobe room across the passage. 2 shirts, newly dressed, both spotted with blood." End quote. So there's blood everywhere. In Jessie's room, in the kitchen, in the hallways, in Old Fleming's room, which is odd, everywhere. In addition to that, the floors of the kitchen, some floors in the hallway, and the lobby of the house were all damp, very clearly washed recently. Weirder still, Jessie's face, neck, and chest appeared to have been washed and cleaned post-mortem as well. However, the perpetrator missed one significant bloodstain, like I previously mentioned. 3 bloody footprints in the bedroom, only feet from the victim's body. And as the authorities concluded, the prints did not match our victim's foot size, but they did believe them to be a woman's print. As investigators continued through the house with Old Fleming by their side, guiding them, it was clear the place had been ransacked and burglarized. Silverware sets, clothing, silver ladles, and platters were all taken among other items, but some of the most valuable items hadn't been touched. According to O'Connor, quote, "Mr. Fleming indicated to his tea set. He said they might have gotten away with that if they'd been wanting plunder, and the detectives agreed that, quote, an old thief and a custom thief would have taken away more than was taken. One not practiced in thieving might leave something behind. On the other hand, to have left a silver-plated thing like the empty cruet stand seemed to police officer Jeffrey like the trick of an old thief. And altogether, the whole thing was a mystery that they could not see the bottom of. He had not, he candidly admitted at the trial, seen the bottom of it yet." End quote. A cruet, for those who are curious, or cruet stand, as I only just learned, is this fancy glass container rimmed with silver used for storing liquids such as oils and wines, and you can decant in them. It's a broad scope of a tool. And for some reason, these officers could not get over the damn cruet. Why the thief would leave it, would not take it. Was it a new thief? Was it an old thief? They were bumfuzzled. The night wore on, and although the investigation was far from over, authorities called it quits for the night after quarantining the house and sending Mr. Fleming away to stay elsewhere. The following morning, according to the Moonstone Press article, quote, the first suspect was old James Fleming, the guy who was staying at the house, the father of the house's owner. Fleming was staying alone in the house at the time of the murder and claimed he had not realized Jessie McPherson was lying in her bedroom murdered, since the bedroom door was apparently locked. And in the past, Fleming had gotten a servant girl pregnant, and the police conjectured that he may have murdered Jessie after she refused his advances, end quote. However, this theory too quickly dissolved as additional evidence came to light. A nearby pawnbroker who happened to read about the murder in the morning news, quote, reported receiving the missing silverware from a woman named Mary MacDonald, end quote. Mary MacDonald, it turns out, was the alias sometimes used by a woman named Jessie McLaughlin, not to be confused with our murder victim, Jessie McPherson. It gets a little bit confusing in the story now with two Jessies, but the murder victim was Jessie McPherson, and I will call her McPherson, and now we have Jessie McLaughlin in the story, who I will call McLaughlin. McLaughlin happened to be a former servant of 17 Sandyford Place and McPherson's best friend. I found a wonderful blog authored by Karen Clark, the fourth great niece of Jessie McLaughlin, who gives a wonderful backstory, but here's just a snippet of that. Born Jessie McIntosh in 1835, she began working as a servant at the age of 16 in a town called Inverness. 2 years later, Jessie McIntosh moved to Glasgow, where she held an assortment of positions before landing a job as head maid of the Fleming residence. It was here Jessie McIntosh befriended Jessie McPherson, and the two remained quite close even after she left and married Mr. McLaughlin and left the Fleming place to start a family. Even when McLaughlin fell ill and was bedridden, McPherson was there to care for her son, and run the house while her husband was away. The two were very close. However, this new evidence regarding the pawnbroker and the selling of the silverware set from this alias of McLaughlin's was overwhelming to detectives, and they immediately arrested Jessie McLaughlin for the murder of Jessie McPherson. Quote, McLaughlin, a heretofore unoffending young woman, was promptly arrested by the police and put on trial. Bloodstained clothes were found at her house, and the chief witness against her was James Fleming, in whom the authorities suddenly displayed a newfound trust and respect. McLaughlin was asked to place her foot in a bucket of cow's blood and then step on a plank of wood, and this bloody footprint was then matched to a photograph from the murder scene, end quote. Just a quick interjection here, two things. One, you could have used paint. You didn't need to use actual blood. Two, this was the first murder case ever in Scottish history where they used photograph evidence at a trial. Anywho, I just thought that was weird and cool. When presented at her trial, this evidence was more than enough for the jury, who only took 15 minutes before coming back with a guilty verdict. As she realized her fate was about to be sealed, McLaughlin had her lawyer read a final statement to the press, claiming that she had lied previously out of fear, but that this was the truth. She claimed that McPherson refused old Fleming's sexual advances one after another, and before long, this enraged man struck her and wounded her. Realizing what he did, instead of helping, he doubled down. Quote, through the kitchen door, McLaughlin saw an awful sight. Old Fleming stood over McPherson with a meat chopper, that iron meat cleaver, striking her on the side of the head. As her head lay on the pillow in front of the fire in the kitchen, he struck her repeatedly. Frightened, she screamed and turned around to run back upstairs when he saw her. As she saw him come towards her with the meat cleaver in his hand, old James Fleming said he would not hurt her, and convinced McLaughlin not to tell, for if she did, she would be pulled in for the crime, as he would inform on her should she report on him for the deed, end quote. And allegedly, McLaughlin did as she was told, like I said, probably out of fear, and helped clean up this evidence. Poorly, obviously. Plus, they staged a fake crime scene to appear as if the place had been burglarized rather than just murdered. Just a murder. She continued to say that the only reason she was at the house that night was to hang out with her best friend. They met up most Friday nights as McPherson had the most time off then. It was like a regular weekly date. But it was too late. The evidence was seen, and the overseeing judge dismissed these new claims as, quote, wicked falsehoods. However, thankfully, the public was not so quick to do the same. They believed her story. They believed that the real murderer had been Old Fleming all along. And the public demanded her death sentence be taken off the table, and instead, Jessie McLaughlin was given life for a crime she may or may not have committed. I mean, she was definitely involved, whether or not that was by her own will or not. According to the Moonstone Press article, quote, she was eventually released from prison in 1877 and moved to America to be reunited with her son, who had only been 3 years old at the time of the murder, end quote. And that, my friends, is the mystery of the Sandyford Place murder. Was the correct criminal placed behind bars? Or did old James Fleming get away with murder since he was a man in the 1860s? And it was his story versus hers. What do you think? I definitely think he did it. I think she was innocent and she just was trying to survive. But thanks y'all for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this old-timey case today. I'm feeling quite tempted to cover the other wild murders of Glasgow's square mile of murder, but we will see. If you'd like, I invite you to stick around after the music for a bit of extra true crime today. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. This wonderful story needs no introduction. Titled, Indiana Jones of the Art World Helps Police Solve Mystery of Famous Painting That Vanished from Museum in 1974 of CBS. Oh, excuse me. Did you hear that? Those are what my burps sound like now. I don't know why. I love it. My brother hates it. Okay. Quote, Dutch police say they have cracked the case of the mysterious disappearance of a Bruegel painting from a Polish museum over 50 years ago. Authorities say the case was finally solved with the help of arts magazine journalists and a well-known art detective. Known as Woman Carrying the Embers or Woman Moving a Bonfire, and painted by the Flemish-Dutch master Peter Bruegel the Younger around 1626, vanished from the National Museum in Dansk during communist times in 1974. Is that how you say it? It's Gdansk. It's not Gdansk, is it? I'm going to say Danks. Dansk. Not Danks. Dansk. Ooh. All right. Its whereabouts sparked numerous rumors, including involvement by the Polish Secret Service at the time, in a story worthy of a spy novel. This round painting, measuring just 6.6 inches, was thought to have disappeared forever. But the stolen painting is currently under lock and key at a museum in the Dutch province of Limburg. Richard Bronswick of the Dutch Police's Art Crime Unit said, "We are 100% sure that it's the same painting that disappeared from the National Museum in Dansk back in 1974. Arthur Brand, a well-known Dutch art detective, said suspicions were first raised when journalists from the leading Dutch arts magazine, Vind, spotted the painting at a Dutch exhibition last year. Billed as, quote, not being seen for the past 40 years, the painting was on loan to the Gouda Museum from a private collection. A magazine contributor, John Brosius, did some research and stumbled upon an article on a Polish website with an old black and white picture, Brand said. The article was about a theft that took place in Dansk in 1974 in which 2 artworks were stolen. The Crucifixion, a sketch by Anthony van Dyck, and the Bruegel the Younger painting, he said. Although the people from Vind were not sure, it looked pretty similar to the Bruegel on display in Gouda, said Brand. This painting depicts a peasant woman holding tongs with smoldering embers in one hand and a cauldron of water in the other, which is a reference to an old Dutch proverb. The painting's value is unknown, but Bruegel the Younger's works generally sell for millions, according to the auction house. Brand, nicknamed the Indiana Jones of the art world for its high-profile recoveries of stolen pieces, was called in for help. Together with Dutch police, Brand investigated the identity of the painting, which in the meantime had been moved to a museum in Venlo, in the southern Netherlands. Brand had also scored Interpol's database, which had put out a database alert for the Bruegel painting. Brand said, "I concluded that the painting listed by Interpol and the one on display were one and the same. We have checked and rechecked, including information on the back of the painting. It's a match." The theft was discovered on April 24th of 1974 when a museum worker accidentally knocked the Bruegel off of a wall. Quote, "Instead of the original work by the famous Flemish painter, a reproduction cut out of a magazine fell out of the frame." Days after the discovery, a Polish customs officer who had reported the illegal export of artworks through the Baltic port of Gdynia is said to have been set alight and killed shortly before he was interviewed by police. Investigations into the custom officer's death and the painting's disappearance were shut down shortly afterward. Dutch police are now investigating how the painting eventually ended up in a private Dutch collection. And Brand said he hoped that the Bruegel painting could soon be returned to Dansk, quote, "to be put on display in a museum where it belongs." Some of other Brand's accomplishments include returning a Vincent van Gogh painting to a museum in 2023, more than 3 years after it was stolen, and in 2022, he returned a Roman statue that had been stolen from Musée du Pays Châtillonnais in 1973. He also recovered Salvador Dali's Adolescence, a Picasso painting, and Hitler's Horses, sculptures that once stood outside the Nazi leader's Berlin chancellery. The art detective in 2017 told CBS Morning that he's brokered deals with terrorist groups, the mafia, and a slew of shady characters in order to track down pieces on the black market. Brand said, "On one hand, you have the police, insurance companies, collectors, and on the other hand, you have the criminals, art thieves, and the forgers. So there are these different kinds of worlds, and they do not communicate. I put myself in the middle." End quote. Whoa. What I would give to spend a day in that life. It reminds me of one of my favorite TV shows, White Collar, if you're familiar with that. Like, almost to a T. It's the white collar crime unit of the FBI, I believe, is working with a master forger to hunt down and track art criminals. But it's happening in real life. So way to go, Mr. Brand. Anywho, that is all I have for you folks today. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, of all people. Let me know what you thought of today's episode, and I will see you next week. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.